Portuguese are the first ones involved in the slave trade. That goes back to 1442 with the Portuguese. But things start to escalate in the 1500s, and you're going to have Europe is coming out of the Dark Ages. You're going to have them trying to rebuild Europe, because we talked about how they're coming out of the land poor, people poor, and resource poor. Portugal was the first one involved in the slave trade. Spain comes next. You're going to have the Dutch who come in. You're going to have England who comes in and takes over everything. And these are some of the things leading up to 1492. When we look at in the U.S., we look at Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. We look at the first Dutch. We look at the first Africans coming here in the Dutch servitude that we really know of in 1619. That Dutch warship that brings 20 of them into Jamestown, Virginia. Now, there are already Africans here, thousands of years before that. It's something very important for us to know. You have the Folsom people coming here going back about 15,000 years. Folsom, Arizona is named after them. Folsom Prison is named after them. This is a group of Africans. Dr. David Imhotep, who's no relation to me, I've interviewed him, and he wrote a fantastic book. It's called The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. He talks about an African presence in South Carolina that goes back 50,000 years. Okay? And that book, he deals with 9 different disciplines to substantiate what he's talking about. That book right there could single-handedly destroy European white supremacy. What's the name of the book? The First Americans Were Africans. Dr. David Imhotep. You can get it on Amazon. Also, if you go to my website, on the homepage, I have the link to, I have a picture of the book, and I have the link on my website. It takes you to his website directly, and you can order it from him also. Okay, The First Americans Were Africans by Dr. David Imhotep. And on my website also, you can order the interview I did with him also, because a lot of those, a lot of the shows I sell the interviews on, and I sell the DVDs, so that helps us stay on the air. It's not easy to do what we do, and when I say we, I mean me, myself, and I, because I am the African History Network. Okay, so all the bills that come in, things like that, I have to figure out a way to pay them. So that helps us to do it and stay on the air, because it's not free for us to be on Blog Talk Radio. But yeah, you have that going on. You also have Moors that come here as well. Okay, Ramses, you have Ramses the second, who has a voyage that comes here around I think 1200 BC. You have various groups of Moors that are already here. All right. If you read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., in the first 100 pages of that book, he talks about names that we had when Europeans first came here. Okay, and those names were Moors or Blackamoors. Okay. If you look in Detroit, I think it's around West Island Drive, Selma, around West Island Drive, Selma, somewhere around there. There's a street called Blackmore Street here in Detroit. East Island Drive. Okay, East Island Drive. Yeah, because I did the research on it. I pulled it up on mapquest.com, but that was so long ago now. It's in one of my files. Okay, but we need to do some research on why is that called Blackmore Street. Okay? See, these are clues that are around us that we need to look at. So, as we look at the first Africans coming in as indentured servitude, 1619, they are under contract for about 5 or 7 years. They're free, and they start doing quite well. They're given land and prosper. In 1638, the colony of Maryland institutes the Doctrine of Exclusion. The Doctrine of Exclusion states that black people should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. Okay, and that helps to lay the foundation of racism in this country, one of the cornerstones of racism in this country. It's later expanded in 1665, and all the other colonies start to adopt something similar to it. And it's called the Doctrine of Exclusion. What year? 1638, colony of Maryland. In the book, Black Labor, White Wealth, Dr. Paul Anderson talks about that. And I have a couple of his lectures over here also. But 1638, the colony of Maryland. It's expanded in about 1665 to state that black people should be relegated to non-compensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the express comfortability of white society. Once again, states that black people should be relegated to a non-compensated, non-competitive, managed workforce for the express comfortability of white society. This helped to lay the foundation of chattel slavery. Because at this time right now, chattel slavery doesn't exist. Okay? And chattel slavery is different than any other system of indentured servitude, anything like that that's ever existed. Because previously, with indentured servitude, it was for a contracted period of time, usually between 5 to 7 years. Even if you were the victim of war or something like that. Usually, you wouldn't be abused, you wouldn't be mutilated, raped, things like that. Your humanity was still respected, okay? Your labor was owned, but not you. Chattel slavery, totally different. You were owned for your entire naked life. You were owned for perpetuity. Your children were owned. Chattel slavery was totally different, okay? You were a piece of property. So, we have the doctrine of exclusion. Slavery starts to escalate. You have Europeans coming over, and when they come over, they're given head rights. Each European, basically European males that come over, they're given. You could get 500 acres of land, up to about 500 acres of land, for free. You just have to work that land. So they would need slaves to work the land, because the crops were grown that would benefit the colony, and they were sending crops and products back to England also, all right? So as this continues, you have, they have to have a way to really control the slaves. So the slave codes are instituted in 1705. The slave codes talk about how the slaves, these are rules governing the treatment of the slaves, what they can do, what they can't do. They can't vote, they can't sit on juries, they can't read, they can't own property, they can't have weapons, anything like that. Okay, these are all governing around them. They even had slave codes stating that a slave couldn't look out the same window as a white person. They couldn't look a white person in the eye. These are slave codes, and all the colonies adopt these. 1710, you have what's called meritorious manumission. Meritorious manumission is another way to keep control of them. And this deals with how slaves can get their freedom. So they can get their freedom if they create an invention that a European can make money off of, like their slave master or something like that. If they risk their lives to save the life of a European, okay? Or if they tell on other slaves, like if a slave revolt's going to happen, like Denmark Vesey. Okay, we just had the anniversary of the Denmark Vesey revolt, and that was betrayed by house slaves. Okay, if they told on other slaves, something like that, they could gain their freedom also. This is meritorious manumission, 1710. This is the colony of Virginia that this starts, and the other colonies start adopting something like this also. All right. It's also important to note that from 1611, we're about to take a break. I'm sorry, we're about to take a break. From 1611 to 1783, England is emptying its jails, sending prisoners over here. Okay? I'm not saying all Europeans who came here from England are prisoners, but a lot of them were, because they were sending them over here to work in the fields, things like that. Not only were they sending criminals, murderers, pickpocketers, things like that, they were sending prostitutes here also. Okay. So, these are some of the events leading up to 1712. So what we're going to do, we'll take about a 15-20 minute break, give you a chance to run to the bathroom. You want to come see me, come take a look at some of the DVDs we have over here as well. They're all on sale today. We also take debit cards and credit cards, help us stay on the air. So those who had questions, you wrote them down. Let's take about 15 minutes, go through questions, then I'm going to get into the Willie Lynch speech. Yes, Keith.
My question, I had two of them. My question, when you mentioned, I forgot the gentleman's name, but you mentioned that when he was trying to change the curriculum at the school,
Dr. Leonard Jeffries.
Dr.
Leonard, he was getting death threats.
Yes. What I was interested in is you expanding on why that was so, why they took it to the extreme of wanting to do violence to that man because he wanted to change the curriculum.
Right.
And my next question was, why was it so, what was so pivotal about the bead injecting in anno dominion?
And you mean in the year of our Lord?
Right. Why was that so impactful?
Okay. Quickly, why don't you put it together? First of all, Dr. Jeffries, we have to understand that you conquer people by conquering their information. Okay? Dr. Clark, in this book right here, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, is subtitled Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism. Okay, deep book. It's only about 123 pages, but very, very deep book. And Dr. Clark and Dr. Jeffries were very good friends. Dr. Clark is an ancestor now. And also, this is Dr. Clark right here, for those who don't know who he is. Grandmaster Scholar Warrior. He says, all history is a current event. Everything that has ever happened continues to happen in some shape, form, or fashion. Okay. You conquer people by conquering their circumference of awareness, by conquering their information. Also, Dr. Clark talks about how the greatest thing Europeans colonized and conquered was the image of God. Okay? So, when you change the curriculum and start teaching truth, Europeans realize, those in power, they realize that they got the power and keep the power by denying people the proper information. So you keep the people dependent upon you. When we look at the layout of Washington, D.C., we know the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles. Maryland and Washington, D.C., that's based upon ancient African principles. Benjamin Banneker was a master astronomer. He was a descendant of the Dogon. He was a master astronomer, and he had a photographic memory also. And when Anthony Browder has a tour of Egypt called Egypt on the Potomac, where he takes you around Washington, D.C. Yeah, he has a tour of Washington, D.C., I should say. He takes you around Washington, D.C. and shows you the African presence, shows you the African influence. Dr. Linda Jeffries has a documentary called The Tekken, uncovering the influence of ancient Egypt. And this deals with the same thing. In Washington, D.C., in the center of Washington, D.C., there's a waterfall in the shape of an ankh. This is an ankh. This is the African key of life. This comes from the Nile Valley region of Africa. There's a waterfall in this shape. There's an African presence all throughout that. So when you can change information and control information, you control the people. So what he was working on doing was making it inclusive of other ethnic groups and teaching the truth about African history. He had a debate with Ed Koch, who was the former mayor of New York City, because Ed Koch said that it was his ancestors who built the pyramids, the Hebrews. No, they didn't. It didn't exist back then. Okay, may have to hold up the circle. I may be going outside of somebody's circle, but they didn't exist back then. Okay, I did an interview with Professor Joseph Ben Levy. We dealt with did the Hebrews ever historically exist? We broke it down based upon history. No, they didn't. This was an attempt by European Jews, Ashkenazis, trying to write themselves into history, trying to give themselves an ancient history. Okay, they didn't. So this is what happens. Now, going to your second question would be with AD. I'm not sure about that. I don't know what's the real significance of that.
Let me ask you a different way. Like the whole BC AD thing. Like BC is a countdown.
Right, it counts down. Right.
And then everything else from that
counts up. Right.
Maybe could you speak to that?
Well, here's the thing. It's centered around Jesus the Christ. Okay, it's centered around Jesus the Christ and when he was allegedly born. Okay, now, but here's the problem. When you go study, when you go read, I don't have the books here, but like Christianity before Christ, when you read, they tell you that Christ was born in 4 BC. Well, BC means before Christ. So how could you be born 4 years before you're born? See, these are things that don't make sense when you go through and actually analyze them. All right? But at the same time, as you see in this lecture here, The Historical Origin of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams, and as you see in the book that he wrote, historically, back at that time, all they had was Serapis Christos. Okay? Jesus the Christ comes later, coming out of Serapis. All they had at that time was Serapis Christos. And Serapis Christos was introduced in 320 BC, and that means Christ the Savior. And the bishops in his cult were known as bishops of Christ.